Hey, before I start, it's quite intimidating following Rafiq's Q&A video. It was brilliant, very interesting, and very, very well presented. Secondly, all my answers are very subjective, of course, because these are things I have learned through my experience of trying to make a career in the semiconductor industry. So each and everything might not be applicable to everyone, although I still hope you guys get some insights through my answers. Hey, I'm Sarang. I graduated in 2014 with a BSMS degree in physics from IISER TVM. After that, I moved to University of California to pursue a doctorate in physics with a focus on optics. In the August of 2019, I moved to Intel Corporation as a technology development engineer in the metrology module, which comes under Intel Mask Operations. At Intel, I work on developing improved imaging slash registration techniques for new process lines. This is kind of a very broad question to answer in a minute or two, but I'll try to give you the overall picture of what I understand. After my PhD, when I was trying to look for jobs basically everywhere, what I noticed is companies in India are very service oriented, whereas companies outside India, especially in the US and Europe, has a lot of research and development. Now, this kind of also translates to why students of basic sciences in India tend to try to make a career in academia over industry, whereas students in the US predominantly move to industry and only a small percentage of students try to move to academia. Having said that, I do know a few of my friends and other people in basic sciences who have made a career in industry in India, especially in fields like pharmaceutical industry, jobs related to patency laws, data science and quant jobs. But for a person like me who wanted to join the semiconductor industry, the only big semiconductor fab in India was owned by ISRO, and frankly, they do not work on current technologies. So my only option was outside India. And for any student in basic sciences who's trying to move into industry, I would strongly recommend to look at positions outside India. So why did I transfer from an academic position to an industrial position? Okay, let's clear something out here. Just because you do a PhD in basic sciences does not imply you're in academia. A postdoc, no, I don't think even a postdoc really implies you're in academia. You're in academia if you're an assistant professor or research scientist in an academic setting. Just doing a PhD in physics does not imply that. To be very honest, the job I do at Intel requires you to have a PhD in physics or optics. So if I wanted to do this job, there's no other way than getting a PhD in physics. Now the question really is, why did I decide to do an industrial job over a postdoc? Now this is a very common question and everybody has their own thought process and answers. I can narrow down my reasons predominantly to two major points. The first one is, I thought I was at a point in life where I needed to be financially secure. Unfortunately, postdoc jobs are not compensated that well in most parts of the world, though there are exceptions like Los Alamos National Lab, Lawrence Berkeley, some places in Australia that do pay you pretty reasonably, but predominantly industry does pay substantially more than a postdoc position. My second reasoning was that I did consider doing a postdoc, but I was very greedy in the sense that I was very sure I don't want to do like an average or a good postdoc. I want to do like the bloody best in my field. And now this comes to kind of my objective way of looking at things. Again, this is my thought process where I think if you're going to an industry, any job experience helps your CV. You worked at a startup for 2 years. It looks good on your CV because you gained all these skills. Now, with a postdoc, it can sometimes end up hurting your CV because a postdoc is not really a job. It's a transition to either industry or academic position. To industry, it's fine. But if you're looking for an academic position, then let's say you did a wonderful PhD. You had these wonderful publications in big journals. You went to all these conferences, met all these wonderful scientists. And then you went and did a postdoc in a new lab that was kind of slower paced. You stayed there for 3 to 4 years. There were no major outcomes. You published probably a couple of papers, not in big journals. And after that, when you apply for an academic position, I believe people tend to look at it very objectively, where they see that this person does not, was doing so well, and then suddenly he slowed down a bit, by no fault of yours. And I could be wrong here. There could be people who don't look at it that way, but my thing is, let's say I apply, and it's not just me, there's a bunch of people, other people applying, and if they did substantially better during their postdoc, then why would someone take me? So for that same reason, I wanted to make sure if I do a postdoc, it has to be with this person in this field, and these are the outcomes I needed. And with all this in mind, I narrowed down my search to 2 professors. One of them outright said, "No, I'm not taking you." The other one was interested. We did talk a couple of times. He interviewed me, and he was happy. We ended up writing a research proposal to get funding. Unfortunately, that project didn't get funded, so I couldn't join him. And after that, I was very sure that, okay, now I want to join industry. So that was my major reason for joining industry. So again, my advice to anybody who wants to do a postdoc is be very sure what you want to do as in the postdoc. Don't do a postdoc just for the sake of it, because it has to lead to an academic position. So it has to really elevate your CV. So be greedy, do the best postdoc that you can, and hopefully you can find an academic position. Now, the last part of the question, how did my job search work out? So I was kind of lucky. So I got my job through what in India you call campus recruiting. Intel was visiting my university, and I gave them my CV, and I got a call back. We had multiple rounds of interviews, and I was offered the job. I did apply to other industrial positions as well. So my number one point would be to have a solid LinkedIn profile. A solid LinkedIn profile goes a long way. So don't look at mine. Mine's terrible. I should be working on it. But there are enough, YouTube videos and things out there that helps you make a good LinkedIn profile. My second one would be to network. Try to network as much as possible. Again, LinkedIn is a good social platform. Other than that, you meet people at conferences and all these career fairs, and try to network as much as possible. My third one, and this I have found to be very useful, is if you're applying for an industrial position, try to get an internal referral. So what I mean by that is you can directly apply for a position through the website or through LinkedIn, right? But then that goes through multiple layers of filtering through like softwares before it's actually looked at by a human. So you have to bypass all that to make sure it reaches the right person. But a lot of companies, actually most companies I know, have like internal referral, where you can actually ask an employee in the company to refer you for certain positions. It definitely is very important in Intel. So what happens is that helps you bypass all those filtering layers, and directly your CV goes to the HR. And I have found that to be very useful. For example, I referred about 3 people in the last 6 months, and 2 of them were offered positions at Intel, which is a 66% hit rate, which is amazing. And people are generally very hesitant to try to reach out to people they know, asking them to be a referral. I mean, you don't lose anything, and I'm sure like people are nice and would be more than happy to refer you. Most companies also have perks for referring. For example, if I refer somebody and they get hired, I get like a bonus. So it's a win-win. So if you can find somebody that you know, or a friend's friend you know, who can refer you internally, go for it, and that'll definitely help you with your job search. Does a PhD restrict you from applying to non-R&D positions? No, I mean a PhD doesn't restrict you from anything. You can apply to non-R&D position. In fact, I know a lot of people who work in non-R&D who have a PhD. But to be very honest, most of them realized that they do not want to work in R&D while they were doing their PhD, and decided this is not what I want to do in the long run. But there are certain career choices like scientific communication, editors of these big journals, scientific consulting, patent offices. So there are fields where they require people with PhD degrees to work in non-R&D sectors. Even a couple of weeks back, Rafiq was saying, there's a shortage of scientific illustrators with a background in research. So there are, of course, job positions. But let's say you already know what you want to go into before your PhD, then you need to really ask a question that does that job really require a PhD? Because a PhD is a big investment in your life, like it's 5 to 6 years of a life. Of course, you learn a lot of skills and a lot of techniques and other soft skills, but is that is that 5 or 6 years of research worth that job, or does a MBA or does an MTech help me more than that? So it kind of depends on what non-R&D job you're talking about. For example, if you want to go into a managerial position after your PhD, sure, you can still get a job as a manager, but an MBA might be more practical and a more useful degree than a PhD in that sense. Even with a PhD, a lot of people who enter with a technical aspect or like an R&D aspect, with time, sometimes they move to a managerial position, but that's more a natural transition. For example, even in Intel, most vice presidents and managers, they started as R&D researchers or engineers, and after 10 or 15 years, they decided to move to a managerial position. So that's always there, but that's like the more natural progression. Pros and cons of joining industry at different stages. Let me start with joining after PhD compared to joining after a postdoc. It's a very industry specific question, but I'll kind of give the general idea of industries I'm familiar with. There's no big difference if you join after a PhD or if you join after a postdoc. I had friends who joined after a postdoc. We entered at the same level in Intel. Now, I can only think of two scenarios where a postdoc might be helpful. The first one is if you think a postdoc might help you improve your CV, which makes it easier to find a job in the R&D industry. The second is if you actually want to change your field of research to a new field, and then postdoc is a good place to do that. And these are examples where people are already sure that they want to join companies and not go into academia. But for people who are unsure, postdoc is a good place where you get to work as an independent researcher and see if that is something you want to do or if you want to join a company. Now, coming to the question of joining industry after BSMS to a PhD, there is no real pros and cons list. The question is, what do you want to do? For example, there are some industries, some topics in computer science where you can still do an R&D job with a master's, but certain other fields, like a lot of fields in biology, pharmaceutical industry, semiconductors, where you might need a PhD to do an R&D. But if you want to do data science or some managerial positions, then you don't really need a PhD. You can directly join after masters. So the question is whether you want to join an R&D industry or whether you want to do something else. And depending on that, you have to decide whether you want to do a PhD or not. So I don't think it's a pros and cons list. It's more about what kind of job do you want to do, and then do some research about, to land that job, what kind of degree do I need. Skills that are transferable from your PhD. Well, obviously all the technical skills, all the experimental skills you learn, all the data analysis skills you learn, all the coding skills you learn, these are definitely transferable to any industry. Some of the soft skills that I think that are also transferable, I can mainly think of three. The answers might sound a bit cliched, but I find it very true. The first is scientific communication. You present your work during grad school to so many different types of audiences that you learn to coherently pitch any idea in your head into a presentation. And this is a very useful skill even in a company. The second is you learn to be patient and you learn to persevere, which is again very important because you have a string of failures in grad school. Most people have the string of failures in grad school, and you learn how to gauge when to move on and when to continue trying to make something work. The third, I think, is you learn to work with different types of people from different parts of the world. In grad school, you collaborate with so many groups and so many people, and that could be similar in an industry where you could be part of this small project which is actually related to this big project. So you need to learn how to deal with different people and to work with different kinds of people, which can come from grad school experience. Now, my advice about a skill that you should try taking up is my number one on my list has always been coding. I mean, there's no industry left where a good coder is not useful. So brush up your coding skills. Try to do projects in your free time. And nowadays, you don't even need to go to school. You can learn coding online. There are so many platforms available. So definitely try to improve on your coding skills. And one of the best ways that I have found is to take up projects and try to finish it in your free time. It's also kind of fun, to be very honest. I hope this Q&A video session gave you some insights into moving into an industrial job. Also, doing this video session, I suddenly had this increase in respect for all these YouTubers and vloggers. Looking into a camera and just talking is really, really tough. Who knew?